I'm Dan Langley, and this is the Manufacturing IT Podcast. In each episode, I speak with the key people of influence within smart manufacturing. In each conversation, we unpack and dissect all things Industry 4.0, from technology and trends to the ever-evolving digital manufacturing landscape. Let's get to it. Hi everybody, welcome to the latest episode of the Manufacturing IT Podcast. I'm joined today by Bryan Sapot, CEO from Mingo Smart Factory. Bryan, welcome to the podcast.
Hey Dan, thanks for having me.
No, my pleasure, Bryan, and good to have you on the show. I appreciate your time here. So maybe you could start, Bryan, by giving everyone a bit of an intro into who you are and what you're doing at Mingo Smart Factory.
Yeah, so I'm the CEO of Mingo Smart Factory, and what Mingo is a tool to do two primary things for manufacturing companies. One is help them manage the plant with real-time data. So being able to answer the simple questions of when am I going to finish this job, where is it at, and have that information more real time at a manager or an operator's fingertips versus writing the things down on pieces of paper. The other thing that we really help people do is help with improvement projects. So let's say you find an area on a line or a machine that's really ripe for downtime reduction or quality improvements. We help give the data to the manufacturing engineers to really understand where the problems are, and then they can use that information to fix it, monitor it over time, make sure it's continually being improved, and then once they get the gains they want, they can sustain those over time.
Yeah, it's a good intro, Bryan. And so just for clarity, the platform is called Mingo, but the company is Mingo Smart Factory, right?
It's the same. So the platform's Mingo Smart Factory. We shorten it up just to make it easier. So
yeah, no, that's cool. And Bryan, look, you've had the business, I see, 8-9 years or so. Talk us through your journey over that period, because I know from being a founder, CEO myself, the business challenges, the iterations, the kind of complications. So talk us through your journey over the last 8-9 years with the company.
Yeah, so what's interesting is where we are now is not where we started. And I think that's very common for most companies. So the idea for Mingo, and it was back then, it was called Sensor Tracks. We had a goofy spelling, just like most startups that no one could spell and few people could say. That's why we changed it. But anyway, it started when I saw a presentation by the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, and he was talking about monitoring washing machines and laundromats and wellheads in the middle of Texas where there might be a cow and a radio tower and no people. And I had thought this would be a really good opportunity to help mid-market machine manufacturers, like manufacturing equipment manufacturers, to be able to monitor their equipment in the field and then do that whole software-enabled services model. So, ship them spare parts before they need them and, really understand when their machines are having problems. 9 years ago, we were way out ahead of that market. The machine manufacturers to this day are still trying to build that, but they're not really ready. So we pivoted towards the end users and really monitoring the equipment in their factory so we can connect directly to the PLCs and use sensors and all kinds of cool technology to gather that data. And the product has really grown over time from a kind of a simple machine monitoring tool, like is it up, is it down, why, into this comprehensive, you could almost call it a MES or a manufacturing execution system. I don't like that term. It's got a lot of baggage, but to manage the entire factory floor. And it's really just, I guess, we made that pivot in 2016 away from the machine OEMs and towards, the end users. And it's kind of been this long iteration of adding more and more features to the system over time. And really, to get a little more specific, we also focused more on the market, like as many startups do. We took all comers in the beginning to figure out where it would fit. And we landed on what you would call high volume, low mix, or medium volume, medium mix manufacturers. So think like food and beverage, auto parts, what I like to say, high volume stuff out of metal or plastic as well. So that's kind of been the super high level journey over the last 9 years.
Yeah, and I guess the space has changed a lot dramatically. Like probably what it sounded like you were describing is that kind of entry level into industrial IoT with putting sensors on machines and equipment and stuff like that. And you're right, probably that like 9, 10 years ago, that was a little bit before the IIoT buzz and that kind of awareness. So yeah, good to hear of that journey, that iteration. And Brian, a lot of the listeners and the audience of this podcast are coming from software companies, technology backgrounds, and another big portion are from the manufacturing side. So I think it's really interesting for people to hear about the journey, the iterations that companies go on to find their ideal product market fit and where they kind of solve the most problems for the most people.
Yeah, what the one thing that was really wild from that perspective is we had this assumption when we first came into the market and launched the product that we could just connect directly to the machines, right? So like, manufacturing, everybody, and I've been in manufacturing before this for like 18 years. I owned a software consulting company that implemented ERP systems, but not so much on the floor. It was like really back office, and the floor was, collecting basic production data. So I didn't have a lot of experience with equipment. So a lot of people in this market come to it and think, oh, it's manufacturing. It's very advanced. You have all this new equipment out there. It's got, Ethernet connections on it and all of that. And it's like, yeah, that's not the case. Even today in 2024, I would say maybe 30 to 40% of the equipment we touch is PLC connected. Like the networks they're on the network. Mm. And so originally we were like, we don't need hardware. Like we can just connect directly to the equipment. We piggybacked on this thing called Kepware that allowed us to do that. But we quickly realized that most of the equipment's really old and it doesn't have PLCs. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with that because it does a really good job and it's paid off, which I think people like. And so we had to now we have hardware kits that we have to use to be able to collect this data. And really, I guess the turning point that unlocked a lot of growth for us was that. Like, how do you make a turnkey solution from a single vendor that can get the data from my machines, pump it up into the cloud, make all these different tools, whether it's dashboards for engineers and managers or a really easy user interface for the operators on the floor, all from one customer. So I don't have to, as a manufacturer and end user, I don't have to deal with like 6 different people to get this thing set up. I only have to deal with one. And that took us till 2019, I think, to really get that rolling. So almost 3.5 years to really figure that out and find a solution that was, fast to implement and kind of easy to use from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think a big part really with manufacturers adopting new technologies and using different tools is that user adoption, that change management piece, right? And the quicker and easier and the more streamlined that process is, the more likelihood of users using it and then getting more value from the tools and getting all of the upside, right? So getting that streamlined is probably paramount.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and the change management, no matter what you do, anytime you implement something new is probably the most important part. Like the technology is a little bit irrelevant if you get that part wrong. And that is also something that we've worked on a ton. Are you familiar with the book Crossing the Chasm? I know it's like really old.
No, I'm not actually.
It's kind of cool. It has this like technology adoption curve, and it labels the different people. So like you have these early adopters who are like really technology enthusiasts, and they'll put up with all kinds of BS from a product because they want to have the new thing. Yeah. And then there's another like little group in between, and then you have like this early majority, and that's really where you start getting a lot of growth. And those people want turnkey like everything, and and they won't put up with any BS. They want to make sure that your product is used by other people, and that holds true inside of an organization too. Like you have different groups that fit into those like. I don't like new technology. I love new technology. And you have to figure out how to drag all of these people along and how to get it implemented with all of these different personalities. And it's something that I think we sort of unlocked a couple of years ago also. We make everything really simple. Like if you're an operator out on the floor, you really want to be focused on making parts and making sure your machine's running. You don't want to be entering data into a system. So in our system, like, there's like 2 button clicks to do 90% of what you need to do, and that's it. And then we automate the delivery of all this data to other people, so they don't really have to change anything. It's just like, I used to get my data in a spreadsheet from Jan, who works in the office, and now it comes from Mingo in an email. Yeah. Right? So my day is still kind of the same. It's just like a little tweak on what I was doing before, and it saves people a whole lot of time. And we try to replicate that throughout the whole implementation process, and that's been kind of key in terms of adoption.
Yeah, and I think a big part of what we see as a recruitment business, that side of things, is the challenge is recruiting people into manufacturing, getting people upskilled, getting them onboarded quickly, right? And if they're using tools that are intuitive, they're using tools that they're kind of, familiar with in terms of how they operate, it's going to be far quicker in that respect as well. So you've got not only the efficiencies of production and optimization that side, but also getting the other kind of skilled users up to speed really is a key part as well, I think.
Yeah, and the skill set, what's interesting is that the administrators of these systems and the people that help install it on the customer side, that skill set is still kind of a rare skill set, I think. Because like in an average Mingo customer, you'll have a mix of using these sensors and you'll have a mix of connecting to PLCs. Your IT people at that company probably don't want to have anything to do with the factory network, right? And so this person who's the Mingo administrator has to have some networking knowledge, at least to get them, the IT people, to know what to do, right? Yeah. And then they have to have software and analytics knowledge. And then they have to have a decent amount of manufacturing knowledge to be able to, talk to the operations team and make sure all the calculations are right. Not that this stuff is hard, like the calculations are right, but you got to make sure the data is validated and working. And then it's how do we make sure that we configure the system to fit the customer, and that feedback, that comes through this administrator is really important. So it's a very unique position. I bet you probably have a lot of demand for those type of people, I would bet.
Pretty much. And we often refer to them as like the purple unicorns, right? So not easy to find, but when we find them, there's a lot of demand for them. So yeah, definitely, Bryan. Yeah. One of the things that when we first spoke, I was shocked in a kind of good way, is how much success you guys have had with such what I would say is a relatively small team. How have you managed to keep the business so streamlined in terms of people and kind of functions?
It's kind of I don't know if it's an appropriate joke. I think it's what happens when old guys build software. So, I was originally a network engineer and a software developer. So version 1 of SensorTrack's now Mingo, I wrote, and then our lead developer is about my age. You can guess my age from my gray hair. And he's written a bunch of systems and had a bunch of, not failures, and me too. It's not like you want to say failures, but a lot of different life lessons that have been learned by building all kinds of different B2B software through our, 26 plus year careers. And it was sort of like everything that I had done in my, professional life led up to developing this. And I think that's how we were able to keep the team pretty small. And it's very small. I mean, there's like 7 of us right now. And we are hiring, by the way. So the other part of it is most B2B SaaS companies start out sales and marketing. They mostly focus on outbound, right? Yeah. So they, cold calling, that kind of stuff. I happen to have a marketing person that worked with me at a prior company do some consulting for us originally, and we had a massive amount of success with inbound, and we have rode that for like 9 years. Wow. So like our sales and marketing staff is not as heavy as you would see in other organizations, and that's a big reason why. It's kind of counterintuitive. It doesn't follow the conventional wisdom, but it's worked extremely well for us.
I think also another big part, right, is the referral network as well, and getting those recommendations, referrals, but also not having to take huge investment from private equity or VCs and stuff like that. So you're not always just chasing chasing sales, chasing cash in. It's really about creating something of business user value, and then it kind of let the business kind of grow organically, right?
Yeah. And what's interesting about this market and manufacturers in general is they're slow to adopt new technology, right? Because it has high risk associated with it. So if you have some kind of failure, let's say you implemented a competitor to Mingo and that failed, the likelihood that you could do another one of those projects in a manufacturing company in the future is really low, because you consumed a ton of resources to make that work, to get it up and running, and probably took away from production engineering time and all kinds of different things that could have been helping the bottom line.
Excuse me.
And so, bless you. And so those failures are very costly, and they're more costly in the manufacturing world than they are in other places. Same thing if you try, like, I'm going to buy this. We hear about this all the time. We buy new automation, new equipment. It doesn't work out the way they hoped. Like their OEE numbers drop for a period of time before they go up. It's very, very costly, especially if you're running on thin margins.
Yeah, and I know you said you don't like to use the word MES because of the baggage. And from my side, a lot of that baggage is the crazy statistic that I heard that something like 60% of MES deployments fail. And you can only fail, as you say, once. You've got such buy-in from IT, from manufacturing, quality, engineering teams. And if you kind of pull all those resources together and fail a project, or it doesn't go to plan, it's very hard to get that executive buy-in again, right? So it is a really, really challenging space. And talk me through, Bryan, the name then, Smart Factory, because this space that we operate in, I call my business manufacturing IT because that's what I was curious with the name Smart Factory. I played around with that myself. People use the word Industry 4.0, all of these different buzzwords. But talk us through your thoughts on the name of the business.
Yeah, when we rebranded from Sensor Tracks to Mingo Smart Factory, like, we thought about that a lot. Do you focus on production monitoring, digital factory? We chose Smart Factory because it is a little bit ambiguous in terms of what it is. I think when you say that, it's more of an all-encompassing thing. Like when I think about Smart Factory, I do think a little bit about the new style MESs that we are. We could talk about the differences a little bit between the old school stuff and us. But then also it expands way beyond that. So it's not just monitoring production, but it's, if you're in a business that uses, CAD tools, design tools, having smart equipment, having all that stuff connected. How do I connect all the workers together? Like, how do I have a manufacturing system and environment that is smart, right? It learns from the past. It somewhat predicts the future. And in the age of AI that is hopefully coming, it can really start to be your eyes on the system and help you understand, hey, last time we had this problem, you did this. This is probably what you should do this time. And that's kind of what we mean with a smart factory. Mingo's never going to bite off all of those pieces, right? We'll never be like the design tools and things like that. But we do want to be the source of truth for, manufacturing data, getting connected workers, machines, all of that information, the stuff that's flowing around on paper out there today, all into one comprehensive system, and really helping support, engineering, maintenance, execs, operators with that info. So that's kind of where we think about Smart Factory, but there's that whole other, there's a hardware side of it, there's an equipment side of it. I mean, there's a lot more to it than just the software piece.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think one of the things I was also keen to talk about on this one episode, Bryan, was the fact that looking at your website, I really like the fact that there's quite a long list of case studies there. Kudos to yourself, the marketing person you have, getting that clarity on there. So maybe you could talk us through, one of the cool success stories or some of the kind of case study stories, Bryan, that the business has had and where we've kind of got some good results. I think that's always a good topic of conversation as well.
Yeah, our case studies are kind of interesting because people always learn things they never expected. So one of them is a company called Ice Industries. They're metal forming, so they make products for different automotive companies, solar components, just all kind. They have 5 plants all across North America. And in the very first plant we did with them, their biggest benefit was they had effectively a zero inventory variance at the end of the year. So, and it's not that people were stealing auto parts. Like, I don't think there's a big market for that on eBay or Craigslist. But what happens is when you move from paper, like if I'm an operator and I'm writing down my production totals every hour and I'm supposed to make 1,000 parts every hour, I guarantee you that number I write down every hour is going to be about 1,000 parts, right? We're pretty close to it. It's going to be a very round number.
Yeah.
And so what happens is at the end of the day, I'll write down, I made 7,500 parts, right, in an 8-hour shift. But the reality is I made 7,346, right? And that adds up every single day, every single shift. And when you put Mingo in, it is accurate, right? So like down to the stroke, down to the part, you're counting every single one. So at the end of the quarter, the end of the year, when these guys did their inventory, there's no variance because it was all correct, right? I mean, it's very simple, but it's material to, especially to the finance guys, because they get loans on inventory amounts and they have covenants and stuff like that fits with it. The other thing that happens with everybody, and I can talk about a specific one, completely different industry. It's a company called Louisiana Fish Fry. So they're based in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They make they make spices for making like jambalaya, and they make breading to fry fish and chicken. It's really good stuff. Anyway, they moved off of another system and over to Mingo because they wanted a little bit more information. And you can put up scoreboards out on the floor, and they tell the operators how they're doing, red, yellow, green, right? Also with percentages on what targets they're supposed to hit. And it creates this culture in every company of getting to green. So like who's responsible for which number, and they're focused on what do I need to do to keep that machine running to keep that number in the green. And it aligns everybody in the plant. And in the first year of implementing Mingo at Louisiana Fish Fry, they increased their OEE by 12%. I don't know their financials. I can kind of guess based on the number of people that they have and the type of equipment. But I mean, you're talking like $400,000 a year in savings, right? You're producing stuff that you can now sell when before people were waiting around for somebody to fix the machine.
Yeah.
It's pretty astronomical. And literally all they did was set targets, right? Put the scoreboards up, use the data every day to look at the different reasons why they weren't hitting their targets, and just fix them, right? Prioritize the maintenance staff. And even I listened to this case study just the other day, in a food business where you're filling little packets or jars, right? There's a tolerance for how much you can be over or under. You don't need to be to the pound, right? So it's okay if you're a couple ounces over or a couple ounces under. And some of the operators were like, no, I need to be to the ounce, like it has to be perfect. And that would create excess downtime that just wasn't necessary.
Yes.
And just eliminating that and setting, appropriate expectations. So it's like really simple stuff in the beginning to get these 10 to 20% gains in the first year.
And you talk about the gamification, right? And that's how you engage your workforce as well. That stops the attrition rate, reduces the attrition rate. It allows for a happier culture on the shop floor, right? So you've got obviously all the cost savings, and they're the kind of standout figures that you hear. But you've also got less turnover. You've also got a more engaged staff. You've also got a team that are maybe kind of building a better environment as well. So there's upsides everywhere.
There is, yeah, and that's a really good point. Like we have another case study that we're going to publish in a couple weeks with a big automotive supplier. They've been basically able to eliminate overtime. Their turnover is down to like 3%. It's big. They have 1,000 employees. Like it's a lot. So turnover at 3% is like minuscule. And you're 100% right because people are engaged. The other thing that's interesting and is most companies are worried. Like if I put a tablet in front of my operators so that they can enter data in there, are they actually going to use it?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is a lot of times in our implementation process, the machines will get connected and the tablets will go out there and they'll be on and running before they're trained and before they're live, and the operators start entering data into the tablets. They're like, oh, downtime codes. And they'll hit one and then type in the reason why. And the reason is like it's easy to get people to do this stuff. It's hard to keep them doing it because they want help. Like that's the easy part, right? Like, please help me. My job is hard. I firefight every day as an operator on this machine. I have problems with this. I have problems with that. I tell you all the time. You don't believe me. Now I have data to back it up, right?
Yeah.
And if you, as my supervisor, manager, whatever, start looking at that info and say, hey, Bryan, we see that you're struggling with this. This is what we're doing to help fix that. I'm going to be more engaged. Like it's totally in line with what you're talking about. I'm going to like my job better because I know you guys are trying to make things better. I'm going to feel part of the team rather than just, a cog in the machine.
Yeah.
That's kind of the key.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as well. Nobody wants to just be fighting fires all the time, and the perception is that they're doing something wrong. The issue is with them, but equally having the data to back up, that definitely helps as well. Right. One of the things that I always find interesting with software companies as well, and we work with tons of software companies and I've had lots of guests on the podcast as well, is how you manage to work with so many different industry sectors and segments as well. So looking on the website, obviously it's kind of a diverse range, but talk us through the industries that you found that have maybe been quicker to adopt, less quick to adopt, and some of the kind of nuances between the different sectors for implementing Mingo.
Yeah, I would say that 80% of manufacturing is the same, right? Like yes, the machines are different, the processes are slightly different, but at the end of the day, you have some raw material and it runs through some process and you make a finished good, right? And then it goes out the door. It may be a one-step process, it may be a 100-step process. So what we tried to do was build a system, at its core that would be 80% out of the box that gave most manufacturers what they needed and then the tools to customize the rest. The reality is we could kind of support any manufacturing with the exception of the truly processed stuff, like oil refining, making, bleach or pharmaceuticals. But the value is not, our system was not created in such a way that it drives as much value in those businesses. Same thing with like job shops. So, because what they want is a little bit different. So like where we shine is you're making, hundreds of the same thing or more every day.
Yeah.
And, we can track that through the whole process and packaging and those kinds of things. So we're really kind of like I said before, high volume stuff out of metal or plastic. So think automotive parts, plastic packaging, and then food and beverage. So like putting stuff in a bottle, putting stuff in any kind of container. That's where we really shine. Just because we're focused on, counts, quality, and uptime, whereas like you look at a job shop, lower volume people, they really care about utilization and then how do I optimize the flow in my plant, right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And Bryan, talk to me a little bit about where you're kind of taking the business in the next kind of like 3-4 years. What's the plan for you? And I guess this space is massively evolving with AI, machine learning tools, more and more tech entering the space. So talk me through like your roadmap and where you're thinking to take the business.
Yeah, so this might sound like a strange analogy, but the way we think of it is like HubSpot for the factory floor. So HubSpot is a sales and marketing and also customer service system that is a very easy to use. You can start very simply and then, big enterprises use it as well. But it basically it has all the functionality to run sales, marketing, and customer service in one system, right? And then it has an ecosystem where you can integrate these things. And so the idea is to do something similar and, do those things on the factory floor. So, production monitoring, quality, managing what happens in between production, potentially maintenance, and have one integrated system where you can get up and running very quickly, but one that you really won't outgrow.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very different than, HubSpot's a competitor to Salesforce. Salesforce, you can build whatever you want. It's very, very expensive. Takes a long time to implement. I could put HubSpot up and running in like a day, get 80% of what I want, and then tweak it over time. Yeah. That's kind of the bucket that we fit in. And then with regard to AI, we're just going to start fitting it in where it makes sense. Like I really view the AI stuff, the ChatGPT and the like, as an enabling technology that's going to kind of be underpinning software like ours. I think IoT fell into the same bucket. 10 years ago, IoT itself was all the rage, but at the end of the day, it's an enabling technology to do other things, right? To do things better, faster, more efficiently than you were before. And I think at least the current generation of AI, large language models, that kind of stuff, fits the same bill there.
And obviously, a lot of it comes back to getting the right data out of machines, right? There's no point having AI solutions if you're not even got awareness, visibility on what you're making, what you're producing, how much you're making, and the deviations and the like. So I think obviously that's an enabler, as you say, but obviously getting the data out is the first part. And really funny you mentioned HubSpot, right? So I've got another business. I actually implemented HubSpot today in about 30 minutes for that business, very, very easy. But I also got the HubSpot vibes when I was looking at your website. I noticed a couple of like the orange and the white and stuff like that started to get that. So yeah, strange that you mentioned HubSpot as an example.
Yeah, we take inspiration from them for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. And what are you seeing, from my side? I've been in manufacturing in the MES type space for the last 10 years, Brian. I've seen the space evolve massively from the monolithic, big implementations of MES, 18 months to get value, to now the new kids on the block with modular citizen development tools. The space is very fractured. There's a big divide and stuff like that. How are you seeing the manufacturing space change in the kind of 8-9 years that you've had the business and been operating?
Yeah, I mean the big changes are people initially were very resistant to cloud-based solutions. They wanted to stick with those bigger monolithic things like we used to compete against, like Factory Talk and even like whatever Wonderware is called now. I don't know what it's called. Yeah, and Ignition, and we still come up against Ignition, but it seems more and more people want very fast to deploy, easy to use systems where the vendor's going to take care of all of it and it's agile. Like I don't know what I don't know when I implement the thing, and I need to be able to change it later because we're going to be wrong, right? As much as we think we know, we're going to be wrong. And we see more and more people being willing to do that versus starting off with the monolith. The other thing that we see is like a lot of times the driver to buy a system like Mingo, and I would say some of our competitors, is you get a younger person getting into an executive seat. Like you get a 30-something or low 40s, and they're like, I can't run my life on spreadsheets, right? Yeah. I need to know what's going on my phone, right? I think other people need to too. Like there's way better ways to be doing this stuff, and we're seeing that more and more. We're also seeing cybersecurity is a big deal, but we're seeing companies be way more sophisticated about how they handle security on their machine networks, their office networks, segmenting those things, and now doing things that 10 years ago they never would. Like a lot of people were just like, I'm not connecting my machines to any network. I don't care, right? Yeah. But they've gotten sophisticated now that they're willing to do that even in sensitive industries. So that's really, really been good.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you mentioned is that kind of shorter sales cycles and quicker time to value for customers. And what we see and what we hear is that, traditional, as I said earlier, big implementations, you're speaking to kind of 4 or 5 different departments, getting a lot of buy-in. And then often getting stuck in pilot purgatory, right? Everybody's got a different agenda, they've got different KPIs they want to measure. Whereas these kind of smaller, more agile deals can get in, maybe like some of the case studies that you've got, demonstrate some value pretty quickly, right? And say, look, we can do X, we can do Y, we can do Z, and this is it. And that allows the companies to take less risk, which means projects move faster, and companies like yours can kind of show more value. So I think that's a really positive step for the space as well.
It is. Yeah, and people are more willing. When we first started, people were doing pilots on single machines. Pilots on single machines don't work unless it's like super focused and really short. Because what happens is let's say you have a department, 5-6 pieces of equipment or 5-6 lines. You have one person running a trial on a piece of software, and everybody else is using paper. The person running the trial has to do both. If they get busy, which one are they going to do? The paper, because it's what matters, right? Yeah. So when you do these things, do a department, right? So all the people are working on the same stuff, or do a very focused trial. Like we're going to do it for 3 weeks. This is what we're trying to test, right? And stop. So that one's, it's been really interesting to see how that's evolved over time. Even our pricing has changed to kind of support that. We now just do site licenses rather than individual machine subscriptions, just to help enable that.
And I think that transparency, right, with pricing is a big point as well, really. Getting as many users using the tools, many users kind of getting technology, helps with adoption, helps with getting better results, and it's easier for sites to manage on that side. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah. Well, look, Brian, we've been chatting for half an hour. The time flies by, so I really appreciate your time. Good to have you on the podcast, and good to kind of share more info with the network about Mingo. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Cool. Well, that's it for another episode. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation and are a little bit more knowledgeable after the episode. If you're a fan of the show, please like, share, and subscribe with your colleagues and friends. And if you'd like to be a guest on a future episode, just drop me a note on LinkedIn. See you next time.